I think we're back.
Yes, indeed. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 39 of the Backyard Banter Podcast. My name is Matt Harmon. Thank you so much for tuning in for another episode. I'm really excited to talk to you all tonight, and I'm very excited because we've got a great guest tonight rocking the Led Zeppelin shirt on the other end of the call right now. It's Bob Harris of Football Diehards, one of the longtime legends in the industry. Bob, how are you doing tonight?
That's the nicest way anyone's called me old in days now. I'm doing good. Realizing that the hair and beard game is so strong there, I'm taking the zero. I'm zigging when you zagging with the zero hair and beard approach.
Well, there's different strategies. There's no one way to win a league. There's no one way to present your face. So that's
right,
that's the way we're going here tonight. Yeah, absolutely. Well, Bob, if you know how the show goes, it's always right off the bat that I ask people, how did you come to fall in love with the game of football, with fantasy sports? Take us through the baby steps there of your journey.
Back in the, as a kid, I was a pretty avid reader, and Xander Hollander's Strange But True Football Stories came by me, and there were a series of books. So and the stories fascinated me. I mean, just absolutely fascinated me. They were just kind of, more anecdotal, games that were lopsided, strange stories about different players and things like that. And I found myself getting wrapped up in them. And subsequent to that, my dad was always a lifelong subscriber to Sports Illustrated. So I would run out to the mailbox ahead of him and grab that every day, every week, every Friday it would come, and I would just devour it. And I love the stories. I love the narrative. And, then, over time playing football, played through, Little League, Pop Warner, high school, into college. And so, loved playing the game, loved reading about the game, and football pretty much dominated. Wasn't that keen on the baseball and the other things like that. And it just fell in love with football in general. Love watching, part of that is your dad, you sit around on Sundays watching games with your dad. And I mean, that's just, football is just something that seems like part of life, so big a part of life that I'm not sure how I would view life without it.
I know, it's funny. Once it really comes to dominate your existence, you have no idea what life would be like without it. Even in the off season, man, like I feel that way. It's because we're constantly paying, especially, us in the industry, we're constantly paying attention to it. The NFL really has a way of making sure you never ignore it. So, Bob, kind of taking another step there through your journey in the football world, what was the impetus to ever take the next step and kind of get into the business and decide to cover the sport? Am I coming through or am I cutting out? Can you hear me?
So you're totally broken up. So I heard none of the last question.
Okay, well, sorry, I'll repeat myself. No worries.
Thank you. I'm sorry. It must be my connection, but I apologize.
No, I'm not sure. Yeah, it might be mine. You never know. But anyway, so I was saying that I guess what was the next step in your journey, Bob? What was the impetus to get into the industry or to cover the sport?
Well, I think, the first thing was starting to play the game. In 1986, a friend of mine came back from San Diego to Tucson where I lived. And you guys, I got this thing. You are going to love it. And it was fantasy football. And we did love it. It was nuts. It was the coolest thing ever invented. It was like the most unbelievable way to, you sit there and we have arguments as you watch games and, all the friends sit around who's smarter, who could build better teams. And here we had a chance to do it. And so that was the key thing. I mean, and, loving football. And I think, a couple of years into that league, I started creating a little newsletter for the league, and I made fun of everyone's team and wrote little stories and kind of did that thing. And, I think it was maybe 3 or 4 years in, I started thinking, you started getting the thing where this is like 89, 90. You didn't know anything. I mean, when you got up, you set your lineup and you got up on Sunday and your guy's not playing. You have no idea why. You got an injury report on Wednesday in the USA Today. and somebody's listed as probable, and the next thing you know, on Sunday you're not playing. And so it started dawning on me, hey, this people want this information. They need like more information. And I kind of started having the kernel of an idea. And I think by 1993 is when I started saying, I'm going to put all this information together and see if I can sell it to guys like me. And that's kind of how the whole thing started.
Yeah, we've had a couple people kind of mention that, like writing the newsletter for their league or writing the page for their league, and it was something that I never did. Well, like, can you give kind of a quick example of like what one of the posts would be?
Oh, we went really in depth, and I mean, in 93, the year I started doing it as a business, we advertised in USA Today, and I mean, calls are pouring in. We're getting all kinds of things. And one of the things we did, I wrote the newsletter, had it printed. I was kind of a graphic designer, kind of had it printed and sent it out, tried to get it in the mailbox by Wednesday so it would arrive. But we also did faxes. And I had a computer and one phone line, and I had a kid in New York City and radio, and he would call all the teams and he would get me practice information from that day. And so we would have, so-and-so practice. So-and-so didn't practice. Joe Montana's got a sore elbow, can't practice today. And I would update that fax and try to send it out. And we had enough subscribers so that with my one phone line, if the fax software of the time, thinking 1993, there was no email yet. It was just, there was CompuServe, there were some things. And so I would start faxing it out, and I'm sitting there, puddle of sweat, waiting for the faxes to go out. Well, if one guy didn't get his fax on time and called, it blows up and nobody is getting faxes anymore. And then we kind of went to that, but it was that we would literally, and that, by the way, that guy in New York City, his name was Steve Cohen. At the time, a producer at W Fantasy Sports and SiriusXM NFL Radio. So, and we would talk 3 or 4 times a day, and I would just update those faxes days a week.
That's crazy. I mean, what a system. Like, one guy calls and the entire thing breaks down.
Right. One guy would call it, the heart attacks that I would have, because I mean, look, there's a thing about this business that, for me, being in the information, being the news side of it, start out with was kind of, the way I wanted to, be known. So, or what I was trying to deliver. And I mean, back in the days when you had a newspaper, if you got up on Sunday morning, you walked out to your porch and there was no paper, your first question wasn't, oh, I wonder what happened to the paper boy. The first question was, hey, where's my paper? That's all you cared about. So delivering was the critical thing, right? So that's all I ever thought. So it was great panic, and yes, it would destroy me. And it was a brutal season that first year because we had a lot of customers. And another thing I started doing that next year, though, was fax broadcasting came into business. So it got to the point where, I send one fax. It's 2,000 faxes. It's as many faxes as I can do at one time. There's no limitation anymore. Things got much smoother. I brought in a 900 line to actually make some money at this. And what I would do is I would get on CompuServe on Sunday night, and I would read the box scores into a phone.
Wow.
And people would call that thing. And I mean, I lived on that for many years because the only other way to get scores, you waited till Monday morning, USA Today came out, you would do your scoring, and, you do that again on Tuesday. But I would do it on the phone and had a 900 number so people could do that. And that worked really well too. That was a pretty popular part of the service. And that was like 94. 95, there became this thing. One of my subscribers called and said, have you ever heard of the World Wide Web? I went, what is this thing you speak of? I don't know much about it. I have the CompuServe, but no, this is a whole different thing. And as he explained it to me, it started coming into my mind. I literally remember I printed things and mailed things. I mean, there was a 8-page newsletter that, I mean, as a graphic designer kind of guy, I put a lot of work and effort into, and we ran it to negatives on a high setter, and that went to the printer, and then it came back, and me and a bunch of guys sat there and stuffed them in envelopes and hope they made it on time. And all of a sudden, here's this guy telling me, you can do that as many times as you want for no money. I'm like, what? Tell me more about this. So I got into the actually became a pretty handy designer early in the early going of those things. My website got the top 5% of the web, which is a big deal at the time. And I can remember like newspapers calling me and saying, wow, look at all this stuff. You must have 50 guys working there, And again, I'm sitting there in my underpants in a puddle of sweat going, why should I tell? Oh, we've got a big crew working away. Yes, all these things. And so it kind of, the web kind of changed the whole, everything started tilting in my favor. So the printing went by the wayside. You could send out, I could say if I had 1 million subscribers, it was no different in the cost to send out the information than it was to send to one person. So it went pretty well. That was kind of, and there was other guys getting into it then, when I first started online, there was me, Jim Lenz at Fantasy Insights, and there was Sam Kaplan, who is Adam Kaplan's cousin. Adam Kaplan also worked for him over time. But, then you started having your John Hansons, the guru comes in, and other guys, KFFL shortly thereafter. Met this crazy guy. This guy put up this site called Mr. Football, and it was this amazing thing with all these crazy tools and stuff. And so I started talking to this guy, and we ended up talking pretty much every day. His name was David Dodds. You might have heard of him. And
maybe once or twice.
And we would talk code for days on end. And we would sit there and we would hack into porn sites because they were the only ones making money, right? And we would learn their code and try and make these little applications and all this stuff. And we would do it endlessly. It was like the greatest era ever, and we enjoyed it immensely. And it was quite a period. And on the other side, the football side, where I realized that fantasy owners were calling teams at a rate sufficient to irritate the out of them. And so I started calling teams who said, oh, you do this. I said, yeah. So, they would have guys 1,000 calls when Joe Montana's elbow is inflamed or whatever, just people are dying for information. So I started getting in, I think by one point, by 96 or 97, I had, over 20 teams that if you said the word fantasy, they would just give you my phone number. And I had 800 numbers. And I said, look, I'm going to give them their info. You give me the info. I'll help them out and try and sell it. They were fine. They just wanted to get rid of everybody. And so that kind of built on everything too. And then pretty soon, local newspapers are getting the numbers from the media relation department because they're getting the same callers at their news desk saying, who practiced today? What happened? Could he run in a straight line? And so it kind of grew from there.
I don't even know where to start with that. That's incredible. Like just everything that you shared is so, well, for one, foreign from my experience with fantasy, obviously being a child of the internet and everything and the digital age. That's just incredible how much things, like you talk about a niche industry, now it's fantasy's pretty mainstream. Maybe 5 years ago, you'd say it's a super niche industry, but talk about back when you're talking about, that's incredibly small and niche.
Yeah, yes, it was, but it was, there was a thing called the news groups, the Usenet, the and it was like the primordial sludge where all of us hung out and debated and hollered at each other. And it was a narrow band, but it was a pretty intense group of people with great opinions. And it was all the guys that from the past, the Doddses and the Joe Bryants and the Hansons and all the KFFL guys. And pretty much Greg Kellogg and all these guys were in there, and we would do these things endlessly. And you're right. It wasn't until, like later in the 90s when the NFL started to realize, hey, these people pay. These people have money, and they watch all the games all the way to the end. And that was the real tipping point, was when the NFL itself kind of, instead of saying, oh, this is the stupidest thing ever, it might be gambling, we don't know. They started to realize there were some studies came out about, people, how much they spent and how much they watched. And that was kind of the turning point. Once the NFL started blowing the promotional wind into the whole thing, it was a whole different ballgame.
Yeah, that's for sure. And you can see it now with like the Red Zone channel, appealing to essentially fantasy players. Everybody likes to see touchdowns and big plays and highlights, but yeah, right. It's fantasy players that are the ones that need to see who's scoring and jumping around from game to game. I know there are some people that have said they can't watch the Reds. I know I was talking to Jeff Heffertiller of Football Guys last time I saw him in person in Vegas, and he was like, I can't do the Red Zone channel. I got to watch a full game and blah, 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 blah. But it's so geared towards that the mind of the fantasy player and the ADD way we all think now too. But it's certainly something. And so, I mean, obviously you've seen a lot of waves of change through the years, Bob, but what was kind of your first, now you're with football diehards essentially. And, even now you do magazines, as we were talking about before we started recording. And, I was in the magazine with you this year, and that almost seems like an antiquated way of doing things with the internet.
Yeah, it does.
But how did you get hooked up into the magazine game?
I think it was, in the early 90s when I was first getting into this, my publisher, now my boss, Ian McCadlick, called and wanted me to advertise. And of course, wow, yeah, I want to advertise. And that just kind of morphed into me, ended up working for him. And over time, web that maybe they didn't understand. And so we kind of brought the two things together. And I think, one of the things, look, we all know what the limitations of a magazine are. It's a snapshot in time. We're not stupid. We know, we know what the complaints are. Oh, it's outdated by the time you get it. Well, yes, it is. So we try to focus more on strategies and try and show people how the thought process works as much as anything. And then, you give them free as part of the magazine, the web service, and then they get updated rankings every day. There's codes in the magazines that to build, and I just think of the magazines as like a baseline where you build that baseline of information. If you're new to the game, if you're not new to the game, we try to have a wide enough variety of articles, and we have some, really smart guys writing. And that's one of the things I think that's changed the most, if I get off on a tangent here, is how smart y'all are. I got established, when there was like 3 guys doing it. Established today. I'm not as smart as y'all. You guys are out there with your, just coming up with all this great stuff. And I keep up and I understand it. And I can get along with all that. But back then that was not the game, and it just all the forward thinking. So we, biggest part of my job now is keeping up with that and finding guys like you and the different people out there that are doing kind of more of this cutting edge thought on dissecting the game and putting together strategies. And I've been doing that for a long time. I was the first one to publish Joe Bryant's value-based drafting article back in '97, I think it was. Started bringing in guys like Matt Waldman, who well early on. And you want to bring in the forward thinkers. And that gets to now, you bring in guys like JJ Zachariason, people like that, guys like Matt Harmon. And you try and lay out for people and keep them up to date with the game, but you realize that's just the magazine component, and that's a service throughout the preseason where you're providing a constant flow of news, the whole thing, and that goes in through the season too. And so it just the whole thing builds on each other. So that's the thing about the magazines. If we were just a magazine, we would be doomed. And no offense to everyone out there who's just a magazine, but that's, you're a snapshot, you're a moment caught in time. And if you can't build on that, it makes it hard to do it. And it's hard to maintain your credibility. And in the end, that's what we're selling, right, Matt? You're selling credibility. You put in the work, we're selling iced Eskimos. This is the smartest audience known to man. Right. I don't know if anyone out there who's dealing with an audience that's as sharp as ours. You're not, and the other thing about this audience, they all know, but we're not for some quirk of fate or whatever. They could do your job every bit as well as you can do your job. And the truth is they could, because they put it, that's the thing about this audience. That's one of the things I love about it. You walk around through an event or something, and, I've been, working for Sirius. I've had the pleasure of covering like FanDuel's championships the last few years and things like that. These guys are all, they're high-end people, the high stakes players. And now it's even going down to, everybody's league. People are drafting quarterbacks late in their local leagues, and, there is no more such thing as a sleeper. We used to talk about sleepers was, there hasn't been a sleeper for years. Everybody knows there's values now. And so that's part of it is keeping the audience, where they need to be and where they want to be. And they are a smart bunch of people. And so that's a bit of an effort, and it keeps all of us on our toes. Again, you're not fooling anybody. You're going to get called out if you throw out some BS. And I like that about the business. Keeps you pushing hard.
Well, I love the point that you just made about, anybody could do this. Somebody, the readers that feel confident enough to be like, well, if I was in a league with you guys, I could beat you. Of course you could. Why not? You're just as smart as we are. It's not ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. It's football. If you put the time and dedication into it, you're smart at it.
Right. We all know what it takes. I mean, when you're in this business, this is not a forgiving business. There's a bunch of people out there that want to do this and try to do this. And I've been doing it 23 years. I have seen as many go as I've seen come. And that's, you have the effort required. I think that's the thing, do it to people that don't. But I mean, look, it's a decision I made. I said, I'm going to do this. And I mean, if I do this another 20 years, at some point I will break even, right? That's, this is, I mean, I've been successful at it, but I mean, it's a thing where you give up a lot. I know you give up a lot. We're both sitting here, on a Thursday night. We probably don't spend a lot of time going out during the season. I mean, when August 1st hits, I will work every day through February, through the Super Bowl, every single day, probably 18 hours a day, maybe more some days. And I mean, that's not a complaint. That's just what it takes to get along. I mean, you have to keep on top of this stuff. And that's the thing that separates the people that do the business from the people who are pretty sure they could do the business. They could. It's just a matter of putting in the time and effort. And there are some sacrifices involved.
Oh, absolutely. You mentioned the season coming, and I've felt it. Last year was obviously my first year covering the game full time, and the difference is almost unexplainable. What it does to your life, and again, like you said, not a complaint at all. It's just this is the dream, but at the same time, it is very different, and I can feel that coming again, and it's very exciting, but also a little almost a little anxious too. You get that anxiety feeling of oh man,
right,
life is about to get turned up on its head when the season comes, and I think that a lot of people that follow us and read us know that. Maybe some others don't, but Bob, you mentioned you've seen a lot of people come, but also a lot of people go. Is it really just the mm-hmm. lack of ability to put the time in, or maybe a desire, or even just life gets in the way? Is that really the big factor, or is there other things that you've seen people go for?
I think part of it is the grind, and part of it is look. We say that anyone who's out there who plays, you do know enough, but I mean, there is some level of talent required. You have to be entertaining. I talk about, reading the stories in my youth, the strange but true football stories, telling the story, being able to tell the story, being able to communicate your ideas in the written form or in an entertainment radio or doing podcasts is a big deal. And not everyone. And so that's part of it. But I think the biggest part of it is just, surviving the grind. I mean, I've worked every Christmas and Thanksgiving Day for 23 years. I mean, that doesn't make you popular with the folks or the ladies. I mean, what, during the season, how many days?
Oh God, none, maybe one if I'm lucky.
Right, because I mean, that's the thing. It goes back to the paper boy analogy. Where's my fucking paper? That's all anyone cares about at the end of the day. Nobody cares if you have your stick, your girl. There's a girl sitting on your couch with a makeup running down her eyes, wanting to talk. My cat gets sick. I got to take him to the vet. Any of these things, nobody cares. They want their stuff. And kind of, maybe why I'm still doing this after this long is I just have accepted that and to hell with everything else, because you have to love what you do. And I've gone through a life where I've done many things, many of which I hated. And then all of a sudden I found this thing that I love. It's about the thing I love. I love doing it. I love putting together the stories and the narratives and connecting those to the statistics that back them, making the arguments, understanding both sides of the argument well enough to make my own argument, because, that's one of the big things I'm big on. The man who knows one side of the story knows neither. You have to know the whole big picture. I can't argue against you if I don't understand your point, or I can't make your point. If I can't argue your side of it as good as you can, I can't argue my side of it. And so all these things require a lot of time, energy, effort, studying. And that's, I mean, I love that part. So for me, it's not like a hardship, but I think for some people it turns into that.
Yeah, it definitely can be. And I think that some people, they dive into it and then, a couple years later, they realize that this is not for them. And I'm sure some people even listening to this podcast that have tuned in throughout the way that thought, man, I want to do this. I want to dive in head first. And then maybe even just hearing people tell those stories, they're like, actually, I don't know if I do. Because it really is not, it's not made for everybody. You mentioned that. But Bob, I think one of the things that is so funny about what we're talking about right now, the sacrifices and everything, we still love it, like you mentioned. We love building the narratives, we love building the stories, but I kind of want to ask you a little bit of a side question here, not so much about the industry, because I know you're an animal person like I am, but you're a cat guy, and which is yes. Totally cool with me, by the way. I'm not one of those black or white or red or green. Like you can be a dog and a cat person. I appreciate cats for what they are as well, but dig into the relationship with the cats that you have a little bit. Talk about that. Did I cut out there again? Oh, Bob, you're frozen. Did you come in and out there? Yeah. Can you hear me?
You're frozen in time, Matt Harmon.
Oh, so you were frozen on my end too. So we probably at least got through my side there on the recording. But anyways, I was just asking you about the cats. Dive into that relationship a little bit.
The cats are delightful because they require no effort on my part other than throwing out some food and laying down in bed, and they lay on top of me. And it's an easy thing, except when, they murder things. That's always a little bit difficult. The bringing in of gifts and whatnot. I was going to invite you and Charlie by when you drove on your cross country trip, but I have a very large cat, about 30 pounds, and it might have hors d'oeuvre or something. So
it's about twice his size. So yeah.
That. But I enjoy cats. I enjoy having a critter around. They don't complaining. They contribute the dead bodies. I'm a fan. I like dogs too, but they're a little more effort than I can put in.
Well, I guess, it's certainly understandable. I can certainly feel the times, especially as we mentioned during the season, when it's like, man, am I really paying my dog enough attention? Right now, like I got back from work and, had to take him for a quick walk and then hop on this podcast with you. And I know I can tell he's looking at me from the other side of the room like, dude, are you serious? And dogs are a little bit more needy than cats. Cats, and this is why I like them. They have that personality that they'll just like, I don't care.
Mine are funny because they do have quite a bit of personality, and they can, there are moments when they seek attention. You and I are both have something in common in that, we have great weight loss, and part of our life has become working out. It's a very regimented thing, but before I can start my morning workout, there is 10 minutes of chasing a cat up and down the hall, or I don't get a workout. He is under my feet. He was on top of me. He is crawling around, and somebody will get crushed or injured. So, there's that 10 minutes you got to spend every day. I'm all right with that. I can live with that. It's like a little warm up, get the blood flowing. But yeah, that's the big part of it is I need the lower maintenance, and I myself have to be low maintenance, and so do the cats, and so does all the surroundings. I mean, over the years, you learn how to set things up so I don't go places because what if the car breaks, or what if I get stuck in a store, or whatever. I mean, I do a lot of things, or I don't do a lot of things. And a lot of what I do is because of how the job works. And, you got to be here when something happens or somebody doesn't practice. You expect, right. You've got to be in a place and a time where you can deal with that during the season. And so you do a lot of things, a dog for me.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's understandable. And, it's like you're saying, when this is your job, you're really never off the clock. You punch out. I mean, I punch out at the end of the day. I punch in the morning, but I'm still on. I'm on Twitter, or I'm here researching things at home, getting ready for the next day, or whatever. You're constantly. It's a part of your life. And you talked about going on dates in the season, right about the beginning of July, even the end of June. That's when I kind of start. When I kind of stop fielding offers because I know, like, listen, in about a month, this is going to have to be over anyways, or you're going to hate me. Trust me. This won't work. But.
Right. And I think, for me, you go to bed, you work, you get up. During the season, my day is pretty well set up at 6 a.m, try to get to bed by 2. But for those 4 hours I'm in bed, the phone is next to my head. And if somebody gets pulled over driving impaired, whatever. I mean, you've just got, so I don't know how soundly I sleep because you're always, that phone goes off. You're always listening to it. So, I mean, that's just part of the life. That's part of the part of the deal. One of the, I mean, I kind of love it and I kind of hate it. It's been a long time, but I don't know if I would know how to do anything else. I don't know what I would do without it. And the other horrifying thought is, and not horrifying for me, but horrifying for the world. What if I had to go get a job? What if they unleashed me on the world in a whole? I would be a miserable person. I mean, I haven't gone to work in 23 years. I get up and walk up the hallway as my commute. And I don't suffer fools easily, and except for me, and I'm the only one I have to suffer. So if I actually had to go out the door and deal with people every day, nobody wants that.
Yeah, no, for sure. And Bob, you mentioned one thing. You mentioned the weight loss a couple of minutes ago, and I'm gonna circle back to that. But before we get there, one other thing I wanted to ask you is, obviously, we talked about you being in the magazine, the newsletters, all that sort of stuff. But one of the things that you're really well known for now is working on SiriusXM Radio, the Fantasy Sports Network, right? And I've been on your show. You just had Alex Gelhar, my roommate, on your show last weekend. What's the transition being like to going from kind of print and everything behind the screen, or even behind the pages for the magazine, to being out there, the personality? Was that something that's always been inside you and is just waiting to be unleashed, or is it something you have to develop?
It seems like it was kind of a natural thing. Once again, this goes back. I mean, there was a few years back, early 2000s or so, I was providing content for football guys. David Dodds was doing a radio spot with a guy in Jacksonville named Mike Dempsey. David Dodds couldn't do it one day. They said, "Hey, Bob, would you step in and do this?" Mike Dempsey and I hit it off. And it's kind of a natural thing for me. I was doing a lot of radio spots, with local stations and stuff. But Mike, set aside a little time on his show, and we started doing it every week. And then at some point, that kid that I hired back in '93, Steve Cohen, was putting together a show with Sirius called the Run with MJD with Maurice Jones-Drew. And they were thinking, we need a host in Jacksonville. So they were out listening to hosts in Jacksonville, and some of our shows were archived on the radio station, and what are you doing? You're doing radio. I just heard you. And so we started talking again, and eventually that turned into a show. And it was something I felt like, I think it's a lot of fun. I enjoy it immensely. I think, maybe one of these years when I get even more decrepit than I am now, I would like to do just radio maybe at some point. But I love doing it. And now that we're in the thing where, the last, 2 or 3 years, it's been a daily thing, 6 days a week, you just becomes part of the habit. Again, it's, I've spent an entire life at something. This is the best addiction I've ever had. This job and all the pieces that go with it that add to it. And talking on the radio and learning all about that and how it works and how to, get better at it. I think I was miserable at it at first. I've gotten better over time, or more comfortable. I don't know if better is the right word, but more comfortable. But yeah, it's something I really love. And I've done last year we did a TV pilot that people are still trying to sell, but that was a good time too. And who knows, at some point, all my buddies at your channel, Michael Fabiano, who I've known for years, Elliot Harrison, who I worked with for a year on Sirius, Adam Rank, all these guys that I love. Maybe the television will open up wider too over time.
Yeah, well, hey, I'm right there hoping with you for that. So
Yep.
so we'll see what happens. But Bob, you did of course mention the weight loss, and that's something that I've shared about from my journey. But I want to dig into your perspective a little, because after I published my article, you privately messaged me and sent me some of the pictures of the difference between you then and you now, and it is quite stark. So what was the inspiration behind that?
I think you do this job and you think that it takes precedent over everything, and that would be including taking care of yourself, and it did for a long time. I would ignore everything. And back then it was a little different because, I was designing the website, creating the code, writing the content, all those things. And, taking care of myself kind of took a back seat. And it struck me someone took a photo of me, and I think that was a photo I sent you on my 45th birthday. And I think at the time, I don't have an exact weight, but it was over 400 pounds. I had a scale that went up to 375, and I maxed it out. And, but I looked at that photo, and as I looked in my eyes in that photo, it was I looked and I said, I'm already dead, and just nobody's told me yet. I mean, there was an unhappiness in my eyes, just a dullness. And it just really bothered me. And that was the thing. I just said, I've got to change this. To be my high school wrestling weight. And 9 years later, I was, but it was a lot of learning. I'm sure you did the same thing. You learn over time and you build. It's just like anything else. I mean, as you get better at it, I've just started out by limiting my calories and, locking myself in a room for an hour, whether I could exercise for an hour or not. I said, that hour is for that. And I got on a treadmill. If I could walk for 20 minutes, which was a stretch at first, I then sat my big ass down and sat in that gym and said, it's an hour, no matter what. And that's the thing over the time, and I am now literally a Stone Temple Pilots song. I'm half the man I used to be. Workouts and nutrition became my addiction, and they're non-negotiable. And it turns out, amazing fact, had somebody told me this 15, 20 years ago, I'd be much further ahead. Feeling better, being in shape, being well-conditioned, taking care of yourself, eating the right things, you work better. Right. It's like, every workout. I work out twice a day, once in the morning, once in the evening. It's like putting gas in the tank. It re-energizes you. It's not taking time away. It's adding time.
Oh, I know. And it absolutely is, whether it's your energy and all that. And I mentioned this and really wanted to talk about this with you, especially because you've been in the industry so long, that I feel like our job is incredibly sedentary. You sit down in front of a computer, you hunch over and you type and all that, or you talk on podcasts or whatever. But, I wear a Fitbit. I don't know if you have one, but like my steps in season crater, like when I'm in the office. Yeah, there you go. You've got one too. Yeah. And like my steps in season are just so much less because I'm in the office and I'm grinding for, hours and hours. And I come home and I'm grinding back here. And, you just don't have that time to like get out and be active. And I just think it's so great that you experience that weight loss in the industry, because I think it's possible. I think that's an important thing for not only fantasy writers to hear, but also fantasy users.
Look, I don't know if I would still be alive if I hadn't done that. And in addition, I think, one of the things I've changed over time, I work standing up. I stand up. If I'm working 18 hours, I'm standing up 18 hours. When I'm doing the radio show, I'm standing on, the adjustable height that rolls all around my house. So while I'm cooking dinner, I've got work next to me. Whatever I'm doing, work is right there. And I think that's the more I'm moving, the more on effort. And, that's always been my goal to do during the season, I'm writing 50 to 60, 70 news updates a day, blurbs. I'm trying to, add something to those stories, so maybe half or 3/4 of those stories are 200 or 300 words. But, as you get in the evening, you stretch those out and you add a little bit of, more thought and strategy to them and talk more matchups and stuff. So you're writing all day. And so I found just standing up, it leaves me an edge. And every time I hit that enter key to put a story in, I feel like I'm punching somebody in the nose, which makes me feel good. But that's keeping energized and I think, making the workouts and nutrition non-negotiable. That's the thing that I have to stress is, everything in my life is negotiable to work, except those things have become. There's a time I do those, and I do, I don't want to, like advertise for anyone, but I do a lot of Beachbody programs, whether it's, right now it's 22 minutes hardcore. I do Beachbody and to lift in the afternoon. So, or max 30, they're all very short, 25, they're 25, 30 minutes at the most. And look, if somebody, I have my iPad over there, I've got text coming in. If somebody gets shot or something silly happens, stop the workout and do it. But otherwise, if it's Calvin Johnson, I kind of look at that, okay, 20 more minutes this workout. If my longest workout is 30 minutes, I can kind of get through it. And so I've just tried to make those things non-negotiable. And as long as I keep everything on schedule, everything can get done. And in realizing how important it is to and how much more work I get done when I feel good, that just kind of, it all builds on itself. And you realize, look at all the stupid crap I did before, thinking I was doing myself good when I was killing myself. Now I'm actually doing myself good, and the work is better. I'm doing a better product. I think more clearly. I'm more focused. I'm sharper, and I feel good. And I maybe won't keel over dead as I probably would have 5 years ago had I not done anything.
Oh, 100%, Bob. And I'm glad that you didn't do that. I'm glad that you made those changes, and it is incredible just how much you can build on that momentum. And, you're right. It's finding something that fits within your schedule. But Bob, I really appreciate your time today. This has been a really fantastic conversation, kind of winding down here just a little bit. One thing I've been asking people on the show lately, what's something that you see in the industry that you don't like or you wish you could change?
I mean, it's a two-edged sword, but I mean, it's the way I look. I'm making us all a lot of money and driving a lot of content, and they have the money, right? But the money you kind of wonder if that's really, great for the industry, for the people playing. You see some of the problems that have come up with, associated with daily. And I wonder if that's the greatest thing. But look, anything that people want to do and want to play, I mean, if, daily grew too quickly. I think they'd be the first to admit that, the powers that be there. And I think we all could say, look, a little transparency and regulation is a fine thing. And once they figure it all out and it kind of normalizes, I think we'll be fine. But there just seemed to be that bump where daily, people doing scripts and all that stuff, it kind of, I don't know. I don't know how good I felt about that. Other than the fact that, hey, I mean, they're advertising in my magazines, they're advertising on my shows. How bad did I really feel? So I was conflicted about that. And not so conflicted that I didn't take their money, because we all did. And I mean, that's, I'm feeling better about it now that there seems to be some regulation and some transparency to it. And I hope that trend continues and we can all feel good about whatever form of the game we're playing or involved with.
No, I think that's a really good answer. And, you always wonder, something that's such a community-based thing like fantasy football is, and especially those of us that are serious about it on Twitter, you just wonder, is something new coming in to harm the community? And I agree with you that I had reservations about it as well, especially last year, but I feel a lot better about it too. So it's good to just always keep your mind open to possibilities and being wary of things that might be new, but when they prove themselves, then you can feel better about it. But so, Bob, this is the point of the show that some of the guests seem to kind of hate, but I do this anyways because it's my damn show and I do what I want. But Bob, anytime,
right, you do.
Yeah, exactly. I appreciate that. But so anytime before we get out of here, I always give the guests one last shot at the floor before we get out of here. So to say whatever it is that's on your mind, this, that, or the other. So, Bob, the floor is yours.
The floor is mine. Look, we lead a charmed life. I mean, it doesn't just beat digging ditches. It beats pretty much anything I've ever run across. This, we have a chance to interact with great people, great audiences. The people you meet, the people in the industry. I mean, I think that's, in the early going. I mean, it was such a narrow band of people, and it's funny how we've all worked together. John Hansen, I've mentioned a few times. We were frenemies, competitors. We went, hammer and tong at each other for how many years? And I think it was 2014, 2013, Sirius, through the Sirius, we're at a FSTA convention, broadcasting a draft live, co-hosting with each other, sitting down. And I look at him and he looks at me. We realize, I've designed websites for him. We done all this stuff. I've never met him in person until that day. And we're sitting there thinking, wow, here we are. We've gone from, all this time to we're sitting here broadcasting a live draft on national radio. Look at where all this is coming. I think for me, that's kind of been the thing, is the whole journey has been so amazing, going from, a handful of people, it seemed like, to this huge, this community of awesome people. And Twitter was a big part of that. I don't get into it as much. I read it more than I jump in, and I love just following along all the personalities, and it's fun. I mean, this just us sitting down here using this technology. I mean, for how long have I just known you as Matt Harmon _VYB? I mean, that's what you are. You're an avatar. But it's still, there's this sense of people, you get to know them in a certain way over Twitter. And it's such a cool thing. And there's so many personalities out there that I love, and I would love to get to know in person more. And maybe one day I will. But this is the next best thing, right? I mean, I'm sitting there in just this group of like-minded, smart people who are out there driving you to do better, because you have no choice. Because if you don't, you're going to get left behind and look like an ass. And I mean, I'm in the Scott Fish Bowl, trying not to look like an ass. But I mean, there's all this whole community out there drafting together and tweeting about it and all this stuff. To me, that's the fun of it right now. As when I was younger, I don't know if I would have enjoyed it that much, because it's all more of a competitive thing. It's become more of a community, I think, and I like that. And I like being able to find, use Twitter to find writers, to get them a little more spotlight, put them in front of more people if I can. It's turned into a pretty cool thing, and I'm glad to be a part of it.
I totally echo everything you just said. It is cool how we feel like we know each other when we've never met. But Bob, I certainly hope that someday you and I do get to meet. But this has been one hell of a good time here on the podcast. So thank you so much again, Bob, for coming on. You can follow all of Bob's work at Football Die Hard on Twitter, on SiriusXM. I hope to definitely get up there and join you sometime soon on the radio again. So thank you, Bob, for coming on. And for the listeners, thank you once again for tuning in to another episode of the Backyard Banter Podcast. It's such a joy to be able to share these. We've only got a few more left in season 1, but for now, continue to listen, share the show, and keep following along with all the guests. They make this show great, tell good stories. I just kind of sit here and let them roll. But thank you all so much for listening, and I hope you learned something today.